Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us online. My name's Eddie Wax. I'm an agriculture reporter at Politico in Brussels. I think it's fair to say that I'm in the heart of Brussels. I just looked out of the window and saw the place where the EU ministers tend to arrive for the council meetings. So we're very much in the heart of the policy machinery of Brussels here, of the EU. You're watching Politico Live. It's the live extension of our unbiased journalism. And we're going to be talking about carbon farming today and how to make the EU's agriculture sector less damaging for the climate, how to incentivize farmers to tend to the land, to grow food in a more sustainable way, and whether carbon farming is just a buzzword that's being thrown around a lot in meetings in Brussels, or whether it's truly a viable path to making farming greener and actually enriching farmers as well, and making their lives easier too. So first of all, a quick thank you to Bayer for sponsoring this event, for making this possible. Thank you to the people who are joining us online. Quick word about the socials. You can participate in this event by tweeting about it at Live Politico, and you can ask questions on Slido. So we actually have a poll. The hashtag for Slido is #DriveEUSustainability. We have a poll that's up and running already. About 20 people have already voted. Actually, 65 people have already voted. And that's what is the most efficient measure European policymakers can take to remove carbon from the atmosphere? And then you've got a choice of 3. And we'll have a look at those results a bit later on. There's a clear forerunner at the moment, but we'll take a look later. But first, before we get into the debate proper, Rodrigo Santos from the board of Bayer is going to address us and give us a few words.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you very much, and it's really great to have Politico facilitating this debate, an important debate for Europe and also globally, to be honest. And great to be here. It's an honor for me just to do an open remark because I'm highly interested, as probably all of you, on the debate today. We have a great leaders and a diverse panel that we will address the topic that I think is very interesting. I just want to share 2 stories on these open remarks. 5 minutes just to brief you a little bit of 2 experiences that I had very recent. One was yesterday, by the way. I was talking with a journalist in Germany, and the question was, because of the war in Ukraine and everything that is happening there, and the impact of the war, not only in Ukraine, but for the food chain and the potential food crisis, right? So that was the conversation that we heard. Of course, terrible situation in Ukraine. And we just heard today, by the way, from Ukraine, a list of requests they asked for agriculture and farming materials that to European Union. And of course, we are working, and it's amazing to see the resilience of the farmers in Ukraine. They are working every day to try to have a crop this season, and we are working to help as much as we can from our side. We have 700 people working from our company in Ukraine, and we are working very close to them, of course, to ensure their safety and support them as much as we can. But let me go back to the question that I heard from this journalist. The question was like, can we do food security and mitigate the climate change at the same time? Can we ensure that we produce enough affordable, safe, and health food for this planet at the same time that we drive carbon neutrality? That was the question from the journalist, if we can do both at the same time. Coincidentally, last week, I had the opportunity to visit farmers after this pandemic. It's great to be in the field again, and I visit a farm that is part of the carbon program that we launched 2 years ago, that we have today with more than 2,000 farmers in more than 10 countries. And that farm asked me the question, a different question, but it was an interesting one as well. How close we are to recognize the farmers, not only for what they produce, but also how they produce. Those 2 questions are similar one in terms of elements that we think about, right? And then this farmer took me to the field, his carbon field, and this carbon field, we had corn planted there. Is a 20 years no tillage area. He just recently had a cover crop on that area just to improve the organic matter of the soil and the mass for the no tillage, crop rotation, precise fertilization on that soil. The great news is that on that area, he had a higher yield in soybean and corn compared to the average of the farm. At the same time, considering the partnership that we have with the National Institute, they were able to demonstrate that that area was sequestering carbon of 2 or 3 tons per hectare on that kind of approach. Amazing example of, yes, my belief and our belief is that we can produce more affordable, safe, and healthy food at the same time that we drive a carbon neutrality. And I think a key element of that is carbon farming or climate smart practices for agriculture, like the example that I just mentioned about this farmer. That's clearly a key element to drive that one. And those two things, the food security and climate, and working for mitigating the climate change at the same time. But I'll leave here one thing that I strongly believe from my side and experience working 25 years on these industries that is extremely relevant to make it happen. I think we need three things. The first one is collaboration. Collaboration, I don't think that the private sector or the public sector, NGOs or the government will be able to address that alone. We just heard 2 days ago from the World Economic Forum and the European Carbon Coalition that we are proud of being part of, that they just issued a report. It was a very interesting report, very consistent to what the example that I mentioned about that farmer. The report was saying that if 20% of the farmers in Europe could use those climate smart practices that I just mentioned, we would be able to reduce 6% of the greenhouse emissions, improve 14% of the land used for agriculture in terms of health of the soil, at the same time generate farmer income of 1.9 to 9.3 billion euros. So to do that, the first thing, collaboration will be needed. The second one is science-based. To be able to produce more with less resources, we will need innovation, technology, science to help that. And the third element that I strongly believe that will be needed is actions. And to get actions in place and in scalable actions, we're going to need to have the farmers at the table, working with the farmers, putting them at the center of everything that we're talking here to help drive that transformation. That is a major transformation of the food sector. And I strongly believe if we have that ability to work together on that collaboration, science-based, and having the farmers at the center of the conversation, we can drive the food security and actions that will not only mitigate the climate change, but will help farmers sequester carbon on their soils and really make a difference. So this is just an open remark. I'm highly interested to hear from the panel, a diverse panel with different views here that I think will be very great to have for us in the next minutes. So with that, I'll go back to you, Ed. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Rodrigo. Let me introduce the other panelists that we have here. The four panelists. So in no particular order, and I will come to you in a range of different orders. So, but to kick us off, Lukas Visek, who is a member of the cabinet of Executive Vice President of the Commission of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans. We also have Fernando Miranda, the top civil servant at the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food in Spain. So, thank you so much for joining us, Fernando. Eric Gall, Deputy Director and Policy Manager from how do you pronounce it? IFOAM. That is basically the largest organization representing organic farming in Europe and in Brussels. And definitely, last but definitely not least, Candice Vinker, who is a senior director of a nature-based innovations company called Vera, or Vera. VERRA, and they do a lot of sort of certification of what should count as what should be called a climate friendly solutions. So I mean, just to set the scene a little bit, obviously with the Ukraine crisis in the last 40 days, the agriculture agenda has shifted massively to looking at how to respond to this crisis. How can we grow more food? How can we ensure that trade flows are not too disrupted? But nonetheless, carbon farming is still there. It's still a live topic in Brussels. I want to ask Lucas about that in a little bit, but I just thought it's interesting that emissions are getting very political as a subject. Yesterday, the Commission put out the Industrial Emissions Directive, and already we're seeing farming ministers, for example, the French Agriculture Minister, who's the president of the council at the moment, very upset about that, and very upset about the fact that it's expanding the scope of clamping down on emissions or trying to push down emissions from more farms than what it originally covered. So I don't want us to get sidetracked by that, but that's just to say that we are in a world now where emissions and emissions from agriculture are a very hot political subject, and I think that's why a discussion about carbon farming is interesting, not only from a sort of dry policy perspective about what it could look like, but actually from a political perspective as well. It's actually a really live subject right now. So Lucas, can you tell us a bit about the Commission's work? Can you set out the timeline? This is something which is very much in the long grass. It's something you're going to be coming out with at the rest of the year, but is it still a priority even amid the whole Ukraine crisis?
Thanks very much, Eddie, and good afternoon to you all. You used one really crucial word that I would like to pick up on. You said that we should not get sidetracked, and this is exactly what is happening. In the past few weeks, the Commission put out a communication on resilience and food security, which introduced a number of short-term measures which are necessary to alleviate the pain that is coming up. And also to alleviate the concerns about global food security, which is not present in the EU, but which is at risk in other parts of the world. We have seen, we are seeing the worst drought in East Africa in 40 years, for example, and that is something that is not that's an incident that is not going to go away. Such incidents will be happening more often, as we have also seen in the latest IPCC report. So I think we have to make a difference between the short-term relief measures and keeping an eye on the long-term objectives. And the long-term objectives have not changed. You have asked me about the carbon farming file. So just to give you a little bit of insight on what is happening inside the Commission, we are all set to put the proposal on the table before the end of the year, as promised. In the meantime, we are working quite hard on the impact assessment, which will back the proposal with evidence, with figures, and with facts. And then we are also working on setting up the expert group, which will both feed into defining the proposal, into the impact assessment itself, but will also work on the follow-up to the Commission proposal at the end of the year.
Okay, that's a really good summary of the Commission's work on this. So hasn't been completely, everything seems to be on track on that front from your side. But maybe we can go to Fernando now, because I think tomorrow in Luxembourg, the ministers of Europe, so Spain's minister as well, Luis Planas, will be signing off on a document. It doesn't have any sort of immediate legal implications, but what it will do, it's a document which is a set of conclusions to talk about carbon farming and actually the broader umbrella term, which is the sustainable carbon cycles, of which carbon farming is a part of it. So what can we expect the Council to say tomorrow? What kind of message is the Council going to be sending on carbon farming to people like Lucas in the Commission, who are going to be in charge of drafting this actual law to certify carbon farming?
Hi everybody, hi Eddie. So I think the carbon farming is still in the agenda, even so with the context, with the new context of the war in Ukraine. So we have to bear in mind that in the long terms we have to keep the agenda of the Farm to Fork strategy, even taking into account that we have to change, to shift our priorities in agriculture and food security, because we don't know exactly how long it's going to take this crisis, the war. And depending on the duration of the crisis, we will have to change our mind, our decisions, our priorities. And so waiting for the developments of the events, we have to try to follow our agenda to secure food security, but so taking into account that some things must be on the table, so to try to follow the debates. Regarding carbon farming, so we are in favor of promoting carbon farming as another mean of living, of complementary earnings for farmers. So we supported the initiative of the Commission of Carbon Cycles, and tomorrow we will endorse the Council statement supporting the communication of the Commission. We are still perhaps in the beginning of the carbon farming as a business model. So we have to develop this certification model that Lucas has mentioned, that the Commission is going to propose at the end of the year. We have promoted some agricultural practices that can be useful from the point of view of the carbon farming, for instance, in our eco schemes. But we also need I don't know how to explain. So a certification model that can be trustworthy, that can be reliable for farmers, that can be transparent in the sense that, so we have to take into account different situations that we have in member states. For instance, the agricultural model in Spain within our own country is very different between north and south and in the center of the peninsula. So it's also different from the other parts of Europe. So we have to design a certification model that takes into account all those differences in Europe in the terms of certification, because accountability of carbon sequestration, accountability of the capacity of reducing emission is not the same thing in so different models of agriculture. So perhaps, as I said at the beginning, we are at the beginning and the first stages of carbon farming as a business model. So we rely on our capacity to develop this kind of model for our farmers. And we think that we have the main layer, which is the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, through the eco schemes to promote these practices that can co-benefit from carbon farming. But we need this certification model by the Commission, because we need a harmonized model for the whole European Union.
Okay, that's a really good summary. Thank you, Fernando, about where we stand in the council. We haven't got anyone from the Parliament to make the hat trick, but we can probably wait for the trilogues, the inevitable, interminable trilogues that will take place on this at some point in the future. But let's inject a little bit of jeopardy into this, because it sounds like it sounds like everything's going so well. The Commission's on track. The council, everybody's happy. Everybody's about to endorse this document tomorrow. But actually, Eric, we're going to come to you now, because you and some other NGOs, and you have some worries and fears, don't you, about how using carbon farming as a business model could actually have some unintended maybe consequences, and actually may not be so good for the climate, may not be so good for farmers either, potentially.
Well, first, the organic movement very much welcome having a discussion on how we reduce emission in the first place from agriculture, and how we increase carbon sequestration in soils. And clearly, this is part of a solution. Carbon sequestration is a strong point of agroecological practices, which are standards in organic farming, like cover crops or complex crop rotation with leguminous as well. But like you say, there are many ways at this stage in which this could go wrong at the level of implementation and end up in pure greenwashing. So we really urge ministers and the Commission to first really adopt a multidimensional approach and make sure that carbon farming is not only about carbon. As you know, agriculture has many negative impacts on biodiversity as well, and we do see a risk of trade-offs if we only focus on technological actions that solely look at carbon. There is a risk that we only end up talking and improving carbon intensity, so the amount of greenhouse gas per kilograms of product which is being produced, which will not prevent an overall increase of emission, and which would which could lead to trade-offs with biodiversity as well. So we do believe that it's very important to define very well which practices should be promoted in the name of carbon farming. And these should be practices that also deliver benefits for biodiversity, first of all, but also for water quality and other parameters of soils, because otherwise this will divert attention from the system change that we really need to transform agriculture in Europe and to really achieve significant emissions reduction. And yes, we should talk about emissions reduction first of all, and also in the context of these discussions on how we ensure food security. We believe that it's time in Europe that we have real discussions on how we reduce the production of animal products. We need less meat and better meat in Europe. As you know, 80% of land at the global level is dedicated to animal production or to the production of feed. I think more 60% of the cereals produced in Europe or imported go to feed. So it's time to have a serious discussion on how we reduce the size of herds as well, how we make better use of pastures for ruminants, and that we not get sidetracked, on the discussions on how we improve carbon intensity or how we change the business model for farmers. Because what we need is not, a change of business model at the farmers level. It's really a system change that we need in agriculture. Mm-hmm.
So I think what everybody so far, we've mentioned so many different things. The idea of using what relationship the carbon farming should have to the common agricultural policy. We've talked about what you were talking about, the different emissions that could be covered by it. Whether this is really going to make an impact, or whether really we should be going for the jugular straight away and just reducing the number of livestock animals in Europe. Wouldn't that be a better solution? But I want to come back to one thing that you said in particular, Eric, when you mentioned pure greenwashing. The threat that maybe you say this could end up as greenwashing. Well, Candace, you work for a company which the sort of raison d'etre of your company is to prove that things are not greenwashing. So how could being certified by Verra or a similar kind of certification scheme actually help to avoid that? Can you explain how that would work?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So yes, as you mentioned, Verra is a standard-setting organization, and we run the Verified Carbon Standard, which is the world's largest voluntary carbon crediting program, which we feel has developed robust systems for ensuring the credibility of any credits that are generated under our program. So I would say to ensure that there is a credible approach, you need to encourage the use of standards that are based on the ISO principles for project-based accounting, which the Verified Carbon Standard is one of them. And there's a variety of different key issues that a carbon crediting program needs to address to ensure that you can trust the outcome or the credits that are generated under that program. So, for example, some of the key issues that we think about are additionality, which is really ensuring that an activity goes beyond business as usual, to make sure that we're not crediting activities that would have happened in the absence of the carbon crediting program. And that way we know that the atmospheric benefit is real. Also, we look at things like leakage, which is accounting for any displacement of activities elsewhere. So for example, if a project activity reduces crop yields, there is a risk that potentially somewhere else needs to increase production to compensate for that decrease in yield. So there should be an approach for accounting for that shift to make sure that you're not just displacing emissions elsewhere. And then maybe just one last thing I'll mention, it's important to have third-party audits of all carbon crediting projects to make sure that they were implemented in accordance with the standard and that they are credible, and that someone has checked that to make sure that they are valid outcomes.
Okay, thank you so much. That really sets out the scientific basis for our discussion. So I think that's very clear. It's about leakage and additionality, and I suppose permanency as well. I mean that's really important as well, right? You can't just have I think we're going to be living in a world of increasing climate shocks in the coming decades, unfortunately. So you can't just have a flood which comes in and wipes out all the sort of carbon storage or a fire, and that would really ruin carbon farming farming as a reliable business model, I suppose. Is that something that you're taking into account, Lucas? The idea that we're going to be living in a world of greater climate change, so we can't just simply set up a nice carbon farming system and leave it alone. Those questions of how permanent the actual carbon sequestered in the ground, how permanent those benefits are, is actually going to be put under threat itself by climate change.
Absolutely, it's this is really the issue of permanence and the issue of additionality are at the core of the current works on the proposal. What we really need to come up with is a framework, is a certification verification framework, which will be able to determine how much carbon is stored and for how long. And this is on the premise that, of course, we want to strive for permanent removals. But the problem with nature is that nature itself is not permanent, and it is not just because of climate change, and of course that is a very valid point, but it is also because by the intrinsic nature of nature, and so that's something that we need to take care of in the proposal itself.
Okay. It's interesting because I think it was in Strasbourg, like towards the end of earlier this year, when the French government was making a big deal about carbon farming, making it one of the priorities of its presidency of the EU Council, and it was very clear that the French government and the Spanish government together were very much kind of best friends on this issue. They were presenting themselves as the two leading countries who have made the most progress so far on carbon farming, and that's because of the work that's been happening at a national level already in Spain and in France. So maybe, Fernando, you can tell us a bit more about what's actually happening. What schemes do you have? What kind of eco schemes under the new common agricultural policy? Like, tell us what Spain has been doing, why you deserve to be seen as a leader on carbon farming already.
So I don't know if we are the leaders of carbon farming. We are working toward this goal. So we have proposed in our eco schemes within the common agricultural policy a set of practices in which carbon farming is the most frequent, the most important practices. So because we are going to promote to incentivize non-tillage agriculture, or for instance, grazing of extensive pasture land, or keeping biodiversity areas in the way of a buffer strip of islands of vegetation, fallow land, in order to increase the biodiversity and the sequestration of carbon. As well, we are going to promote the keeping of grass cover in woody lands in order to increase the capacity of absorption of our soils. In any case, this is one part of the way. So because what we see is that we have to try to to get farmers more aware about the capacity they have to increase the sequestration of carbon in their holdings. It's not a question of focusing the farming business on carbon sequestration, but in knowing how much carbon can you sequestrate in order to incentivize this part of the agricultural activity, because we think that a carbon farming is part of a bigger picture. So we can forget that we have to preserve biodiversity, and we have to link carbon farming with another priorities in the biodiversity, in the environmental legislation. But I think we consider that is a good practice for letting the farmers to know how much carbon they are able to sequester and with which practices. And we can promote those practices because we consider that the co-benefits of these practices are very good for the soil health, for sequestration of carbon, the keeping biodiversity. And in the case of Spain, it's a big problem, the problem of erosion and desertification. And for instance, carbon farming practices are very good for avoiding loss of soil and for avoiding desertification. So it's something that you have to put all together, and we can win with the carbon practices in terms of environmental deliverance, and we can win in carbon practice in terms of earnings in a So in a future carbon credit market. So we have to see all the picture, and we are willing to develop these experiences and to work with the Commission in building this certification scheme in order to promote carbon farming as a additional activity in the carbon in the farming activity.
Okay. Thank you, Fernando. I mean, you raised something important. You kind of responded to what Eric was saying before, where Eric, you were saying that there's a risk that this is going to be too kind of narrow and it's not going to take into account biodiversity. I mean, I've seen a sort of draft copy of the conclusions from the council tomorrow. It does say it does have a line saying it stresses that the carbon farming needs to avoid negative impacts on biodiversity. Of course, at the moment it's just words, so we'll have to see what really happens with that. But I mean, when we were talking before this panel, Eric, you mentioned another kind of possibility, which is that farmers, for example, organic farmers who certified organic farmers who are doing good things for the environment, and they are perhaps storing more carbon in the soils than conventional farmers. Maybe they won't get as much of an advantage from a business model like this, because the difference between what they're doing now and what they might do in the future may not be so great as compared to a farmer who hasn't been so attentive to carbon sequestration. So is there actually a risk here, in your opinion, that the farmers who are already moving in the right direction might actually not benefit so much, which would be a bit counterproductive, right?
Indeed, that's one of the concerns we have, that with such new carbon farming schemes, you reward more of the laggards, the farmers who have a lot to change in their systems, rather than the ones who are already have high carbon stocks in their soils as well. That's the whole issue of so-called additionality. So we believe that carbon farming should also reward the maintenance of carbon stocks, including grassland, and not only focus on how much more carbon you can store. I mean, of course, if your soil doesn't have any carbon, you can build it up more than if you already have a lot of carbon in your soil. So that's one of the concerns that we have. And it's true that everybody acknowledges that biodiversity is important, that it's a co-benefit. But like you said, it's just words for now. It depends on how this is going to be implemented. If we have a scheme that promotes no-till with the use of glyphosate, so it contributes to more sequestration of carbon in the soils, but it also contributes to the use of glyphosate. Should this be promoted in the name of carbon farming? Should a large biogas plant next to a huge industrial animal farm get credits? They get carbon credits, although it has a negative impact on biodiversity and animal welfare as well. And then the discussion tends to get mixed between sequestration and emissions reduction. If you look at the example of what France has been doing with the label bas carbone, for example, if a farmer reduces a certain percentage of its carbon intensity compared to a business as usual approach, he will get credit and he will get a label, even though from the point of view of organic farmers, we would consider it greenwashing, for example. What about the import of feed, in particular from South America, which is often genetically modified soya, which can contribute to deforestation? How this will be taken into account in the schemes themselves. So the need for a multidimensional approach that fully takes into account biodiversity should go beyond the word and really be fully integrated in the implementation of carbon farming. And that's why we would like to see a clear list of practices which are eligible to support in the name of carbon farming, and which should exclude the use of synthetic pesticides, in our opinion, for example, indeed.
Okay, that's an interesting request there. I mean, I think that the Commission hasn't, the Commission so far has been giving recommendations of possible practices, for example, for eco schemes. That came up a couple of years ago. So I would say that it's unlikely that we will see a sort of hard list of what should count as carbon farming. But let's wait and see on that. But I definitely note your request, and I think that's definitely an interesting demand. I want to turn to Candice again, because one thing before I think you could help us with understanding, the Commission's basically given itself a year between these two proposals, one setting out, the chunk of the Fit for 55, the main kind of overarching plan, and now it has given itself a year to really work out how to certify this carbon farming and carbon removals. So from a scientific perspective, are we to understand that it's actually quite unknown at the moment? Is it actually quite hard to know how much carbon has been stored in the ground? For example, if you take a forest and you have a certain number of trees, it's actually quite hard to work out how much carbon has been sort of sucked out of the atmosphere and stored in the ground. Or are you saying that with Vera you have you've got the science down pat, you've worked it all out?
Yeah, I mean, I guess as a starting place, I would say that science is always evolving and progressing, and we're coming up with better ways. But I do feel that right now, at this moment, we have credible standards for which we can measure soil organic carbon sequestration, either through measurements or through models as well. And that voluntary greenhouse gas crediting programs like Vera's VCS program have established credible mechanisms for ag GHG accounting that could be leveraged for policy implementation without sort of wholly reinventing the wheel, and that they could be leveraged to assist with quantifying carbon benefits of soil organic carbon projects.
So you would say, obviously you would be saying that why doesn't the EU just use your system, and why does it spend a year trying to doing all this complicated policy making? Why don't they just do your system?
Yeah, I mean, it's potentially an option. There are other jurisdictions in the world that have adopted voluntary carbon market crediting standards. So, for example, Colombia and South Africa have accepted credits issued under the verified carbon standard as part of their compliance carbon market. So I guess there's no reason why the EU could not also look at potentially doing this and using or building on existing standards and methodologies such as the VCS. I think this could certainly help streamline implementation and would also help in creating greater harmonization, I think, globally in terms of practices of measuring carbon stock changes.
Are you going to do that, Lucas? Are you going to use pre-existing schemes? Are you going to use them as a basis for your own way of generating these carbon credits and making sure that they're actually genuinely valuable credits that have actually stored carbon?
I'm sure that the expertise and the experience is going to be extremely valuable in developing the Commission, the system that's going to be proposed by the Commission. We're not there yet, but what I can assure you is that, of course, we will be working with experts who have tried this, who have experienced this, and who actually have credible results. We'll be working with researchers. We are working with researchers, scientists, and of course with civil society and with farmers as well in developing the system. Okay,
I didn't mention that we have a Q&A, but luckily 14 people have realized it without me saying it. So we have a lot of questions. So I do encourage you to get your questions in. If we've already sort of covered a topic, a particular area of carbon farming, I would encourage you not to try and draw us back into that. But there are two interesting questions here at the top, which I think would be good to address in together. It's talking about where the money should come from, basically. So should we be focusing on using the gigantic resources of the Common Agricultural Policy, which takes up, roughly, well, now just under a third, I think, of the EU's 7-year budget. That's a question from Via Campesina, so the small farmers, small-scale farmers kind of lobby group. So why is that not the budget for ensuring the transition of agriculture into positive practices that are good for climate and environment? And then we have Asaja, which is, I'm sure Fernando is very well aware and very well acquainted with them, one of the biggest Spanish farmers organizations. And they're saying, that we're in favor of a private system to get extra remuneration to help farmers' income. So there is a bit of a clash here, isn't there? I mean, maybe Fernando, you can tell us, what's the thinking from the Spanish government? Is it a mixture of private and public financing? Should it mostly be coming from the public coffers? And then we'll go to Eric afterwards.
What is clear is that is a big interest in the among the owners of land, among farmers to the carbon farming initiative. So there are a lot of people that is willing to invest and to know the rules of a carbon farming system. So and we have to be able to show them the path to benefit of this possibility. I think that they are not willing, or they are not thinking in creating a business in farming only to sequester carbon. So they are trying to produce food, to produce agricultural products, and as a byproduct, to produce or to sequester carbon. So it's an extra additional economical activity. And this is the way we want to see this possibility, carbon farming, not as a single goal in your farming business, but as an additional earning for farmers. And I think there are a lot of possibilities. Take it into account that the possibility to sequester carbon is not something easy. So we have to clear a lot of questions that we have about around all related with carbon farming, because we don't know exactly how much carbon we can sequester in each on every type of land. And this is something that we have to make clear to farmers in order to let them know how to benefit of this possibility. In any case, so this possibility of carbon farming must be regarded by the private markets. So this is clear for us. The Common Agricultural Policy can provide a base to create or to promote certain agricultural practices, but so those practices must be in benefit of the environment as a whole, as a global goal to achieve the goals of the farm-to-fork strategy, the biodiversity strategy. In the past, those strategy has signed out for all the agricultural community in Europe. But so we have means to provide this new possibility for our market, for our farmers, and this is the reason why we can work with the Commission in order to build this certification system to let them know the means to get extra money for the farmers. You know, they have problems in profitability, and this can be a way to improve the profitability of the farmers in general, the Spanish farmers in particular.
Okay, I think I'm right in saying that you said that private financing should be included there. About using the cap as a base for launching this system. But obviously, just I don't know why I'm summarizing what you're saying, but it just helps to get it clear for me. But you're also saying that yes, carbon farming is not something in and of itself. It's something which farmers will be doing and it will included within everything else they're doing to produce food. So I think that's a good way of thinking about it. But Eric, on this question of where the financing should come from it come from the public coffers or should it come from companies that want to sort of buy credits and companies like Bayer, for example? We've heard from them already, but they're running their own scheme, their own sort of trial scheme at the moment on a few hundred or maybe a few thousand farmers across Europe. So tell us what your thoughts are.
Well, we do believe that the incentive and support for farmers to sequester more carbon should come from the CAP, which is a beautiful policy tool that we have in Europe to support farmers to transition to agroecology in theory, and with a very large budget as well. And I do hear that some farmers very much hope to attract money from the private sector through carbon markets. But we have strong doubts that this will work for several reasons. First of all, because markets are not reliable. And when you look at the price of carbon, it's been rather low so far. And when you compare this to the cost of MRV, monitoring, reporting, and verification, because like you said, carbon is very difficult to measure. And at the moment, we don't have the tools accurate and reliable enough for the standard that the market would need. This cost for the farmer would probably be higher than the income they would expect to get from the market, especially if the market can get cheaper carbon credits from other offset possibilities as well. Farmers need certainty, and their income cannot depend on very volatile markets as well. And we have to be modest about the potential of carbon sequestration. If you look at the estimation, they range between 9 million tons for cropland in Europe to 58 million tons, I think. If you compare this to agriculture emissions, direct agriculture emissions, which are around 460 million tons, you could see that at best, we could hope to only compensate for a fraction of the agriculture emissions itself. So I do not see, or we can seriously conceive, that the agriculture sector will be able to offer offset possibilities to other industry and other sectors as well. The math not just add up. So we are very much concerned that the hope of certain farmers to attract, more money from the private sector will be disappointed. And this is the experience that farmers have in the US, for example, where such carbon systems have been introduced as well. So we need to incentivize farmers and support them in sequestering more carbon in the soils. But yes, that should come primarily from the common agricultural policy.
Okay, so we've got a few diverging views there, and I'm sure this will be a debate which will kind of move on and develop in the next few months. But what about who buys these credits? Because ultimately someone's going to have to buy them if they're going to be profitable and worthwhile, worth creating. I've kind of noticed there's another argument that's developing about which industries should be allowed to purchase these carbon credits. The Commission has set out a goal to reach climate neutrality in the entire land sector in the next 13 years, so by 2035. So if that is a goal, which the EU has, surely we should be kind of keeping these carbon credits within the sort of farming sector. Otherwise, the aviation industry will be able to, or the transport industry, or the sort of energy sector will be able to profit from farmers' hard work, where without farmers kind of getting to climate neutrality themselves. Is that something that you would agree with, Lucas, as an argument?
I would. I think we're talking about two pillars of the carbon farming in this discussion. One pillar is the pillar of trust, and that we have covered with. That we're going to cover with the verification and certification proposal at the end of the year. And the other pillar is the money, and the money can come from various sources. It can and it should come from the Common Agricultural Policy, and it can come in various ways. We have heard about the possibility of using eco schemes, but there are also other measures within the Common Agricultural Policy to support farmers in adopting the carbon farming practices. The CAP can help them with better access to advisory services. It can help them with the costs that are related to the certification itself, etc., etc. There are other sources of public funding. There are examples from member states who actually use revenues from ETS to purchase carbon credits or to invest into carbon removals in their region. There are also good examples of the private funding. It's a market that is already happening. So in fact, Commission is coming into this into a business model which is already running. So there is already money in it, and what we want to do is to A, bring more money into this, and B, to bring more credibility and trust into the system. But going back to your question about where the money should be invested, there are obviously the two options. Either the investors will invest into their own value chain, or it will be carbon credits which will be sold out of the value chain. And I would always argue that it is that the business case is always on the side of actually investing into your own value chain, because the effects of carbon farming are very positive on soil fertility, on yields, as we have already heard several times. They're very positive for biodiversity, and I want to reassure Eric that the environmental integrity is at the very heart of the proposal that the Commission is going to put forward at the end of the year. So once again, I think we have to always think of these two things. One is the trust, and one is the money, and then the two always have to work together.
Okay, so ultimately you're saying that you're encouraging kind of big agriculture companies to buy these credits and look into this business model and kind of get involved and fork out money, but you're not going to legislate to stop these credits being bought by other industries. Like imagine I'm a big aviation company. You're not going to stop me being able to buy some credits that have been sequestered on Spanish farmland. Lucas.
Who is that? Oh, sorry, I just didn't know because you said Spanish. I was not sure whether.
No, I was just trying to make it a topical example, given that we have Fernando here.
Could be.
Well, we are of course working on the impact assessment, but I think that the point, really, the logic of it and the business case is on the side of investing into your own value chain. But again, we're talking about a voluntary market here, so I'll leave it at that.
Okay. I don't want to leave Candice out of this, but I think Candice, this discussion. Do you want to come in on the question of, maybe you've seen from your own experience, of kind of verifying these carbon credits where most of them are going. I mean, I think you're based in the US, right? So are you mostly seeing that it's agricultural companies that are buying up these credits and taking advantage of your sort of robust system and your robust certification, or are they going all over the place?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question. So first, I would just say that Verra is not involved in the sale of the carbon credits. And right now, anyone can potentially purchase credits of any project type in the voluntary carbon market. So the market is open. I think in terms of buyers of agriculture credits specifically, I think they're probably diverse. Some may come from the agriculture sector and some may come from outside the agriculture sector. I think the only thing I would add to the discussion is maybe that what we're really talking about is the difference between carbon offsets and insets, and the difference between the two being, if it's an inset, it's sold within the supply chain or to a company that supply chain links to the activity. And if it's offset, it's sold outside. Right now, I think that there may be a situation where some companies outside of the agriculture sector may be willing to pay a higher premium or price for those carbon credits than the agriculture sector, which makes it tough to compete and may lead to the sale of those credits outside of the agriculture sector. But I think over the long term, we'll probably see a shift to more and more of these credits being sold as insets and essentially into the sector relevant to that supply chain, where ultimately probably those emission reductions and removals should be used.
Okay, that's a really interesting addition to my vocabulary: inset and offset. Okay, well, I knew offset already, but now I'll start using inset as well. Just looking at the questions, I mean, we have about 8 minutes left, so I encourage everyone to ask a question if you haven't already. I'm definitely going to be prioritizing the questions where you've given your name or given the organization that you're representing, because anonymous questions are fine, but we like to know who we're talking to as well. I mean, some of these questions are very technical, so I don't think I'm gonna throw those at the panelists. That would be a bit harsh. But there is quite a challenging question here to you, Eric, on organic farming. Well, I'm imagining that it's for you, but I'm going to put it to you. What evidence is there to prove that organic farming stores more carbon than conventional? So that's a tough one for you. So can you tell us that organic farming is better?
It's a very easy question. Thank you, because the scientific evidence is pretty clear that for soils managed under organic farming, you have on average increase compared to conventional. You have between 3.5 tons of carbon more per hectare, more or less 1 ton, depending on the type of soil, the type of crop, of course, and that you have higher annual sequestration rates as well in organic farming. And I mean, in general, healthy soils are a cornerstone of organic farming. So farmers need to have healthy soils, and they do have higher carbon because practices like crop rotations with leguminous, which are used to fix nitrogen in the soil, also contribute to higher carbon content, which in turn contributes to higher water retention capacity as well. So there's in particular a meta-study from 2012. I'm happy to send the references later, but the evidence is very clear that agroecological approaches have strong benefits for carbon sequestration, but also deliver other benefits for biodiversity as well, in particular, and water retention and water quality.
Okay, I'm also interested in what's happening now on the common agricultural policy itself, because this week, or actually it wasn't this week, it was just last week, the Commission sent these observation letters to the countries, and not all of them have been made public yet. Some countries, like Spain, I think, have actually decided to make these comments from the Commission public, so that everybody can read them. What has your reflection been, Fernando, on the Commission's kind of comments on the plan? Are they very tough with you, and have they got anything to say about the carbon farming aspects of the way that you want to use the next CAP?
So this was so unexpected. So the letter of 30 of March, this is how we call the letter of observation of the Commission. Is part of the process of the approval of the strategic plan for all member states. We decided this last Monday to make it public, and we have been our first reading of the letter is there are the three main elements or blocks of the strategic plan: the economic part, the environmental part, and the social part. So of these three items, so in the economical and the social part, we feel more comfortable with the response of the Commission. So we have to provide more detailed information about this economic and social part. And perhaps the most challenging part is going to be the environmental field, because this is the most complicated, the novelty of this common agricultural policy, and the necessity, in the case of Spain, to integrate or to get more coherence between the intervention in first pillars and second pillar, with the intervention designed at the national level in the first pillar and the intervention designed on a regional level in the second pillar. I think this is going to be the most challenging part of the observation letter of the Commission. But even so, behind of these all remarks lays the situation in which we think, or we are sure, that this new common agricultural policy is a big change in terms of environmental ambition. And what we are trying to explain to the Commission is how we have achieved to increase the environmental ambition in our strategic plan. And I think we have grounds to explain to the Commission that we have improved and we have implemented a new common agricultural policy that at the same time can be profitable for the farmers and to deliver a good result from the point of view of the environment. So we are working on that. We have been the first meeting with the region this morning, and we are going to try to keep up the timetable with the Commission to have the plan approved before the summer.
Okay, fantastic. And Lucas, do you want to say something about that? I mean, are you putting pressure on countries in these observation letters regarding anything, linked to carbon farming in particular? Or, I know that the war in Ukraine has definitely kind of become a lot of the focus of some of the recent communication. But, is carbon farming something that you're pressuring the member states on?
Well, carbon farming is certainly one of the practices that can deliver on both, both on environment and on income. It's good for people, it's good for profit, and it's good for the planet. So we are telling member states that this is a good opportunity. This is a scheme through which the environmental and climate objectives can be achieved. But ultimately, what we are looking into is the connection and the coherence between the analysis, both of the Commission and of the member state, the Green Deal objectives, the regulation, and then the strategy of the plans themselves.
Okay, that's great. I think we've only got basically one minute left, so maybe I'll just send a quick fire question. This one's got a lot of thumbs up on the Q&A thing. Maybe a quick question. I'm not sure who I'll send it to yet, but the question is from Andreas from the Green Youth of what I think is Denmark. Could the discontinuation of animal production via the replacement production be counted as carbon farming? Meat is such a low-hanging fruit. That's a rather strange image of cows hanging off trees. But maybe we can put that just to you as a final quick answer, Lucas. Sorry to throw the spotlight on you, but is the Commission doing anything to reduce meat production in Europe?
Well, what the Commission proposed to do just yesterday was to reduce the pollution from the 13% of the largest livestock farms in the EU. That's in the context of the Industrial Emissions Directive. What the Commission is also going to do is that the Commission is going to propose the sustainability framework for food, which I think was also mentioned in one of the questions, which will try to bring together all the streams of work on farm to fork strategy, so that the entire chain, starting with farmers and ending with consumers, is covered. Let's also not forget that this is as much about consumers. We know that 20% of food is wasted in the EU. So the burden is on everyone in the food chain. But last thing I want to add to that is that, of course, the Common Agricultural Policy, which has a budget of 387 billion euros, really is the key tool here to make farming more sustainable, to make farming sustainable in the European Union.
And final point to you, Lucas, before we wrap up, because you did mention this Industrial Emissions Directive, and you said that is one of the main ways that you're going to be trying to reduce emissions, toxic emissions from the greenhouse gases from the agriculture sector. I've just got this tweet here from last night from the French agriculture minister, who says that it doesn't take reality. The proposed directive doesn't take into account the reality of our farms. It's a nonsense, and we will fight at the European Council, at the EU Council level, to put back some reason and some logic into this text. So, what would you say to Julien de Normandie on that?
Well, it's a tweet, and we as you know, the Commission does not comment on comments. But I wanted to come back on one thing that you have said about the Industrial Emissions Directive. In fact, I think that the bigger picture that we have is that the Commission proposed, in the context of Fit for 55, that the agriculture, forestry, and land use sector have to become climate neutral by 2035. There are many tools that are going to get us there. Certainly the Industrial Emissions Directive is one of them. Carbon farming is one of them, but there are many other tools which are still in the toolbox to be announced. And there are tools that we have already put forward, including the Common Agricultural Policy, which has to make a massive contribution to this objective.
Okay, thank you, Lucas. I couldn't tempt you into a Twitter fight there, but maybe better luck next time for me. But I think just to summarize what we've talked about, we've had a really interesting discussion about carbon farming. Setting out this broad challenge that the EU has to reduce emissions from the agriculture sector, and looking specifically at carbon farming as one of those main weapons in our arsenal. We've talked about where should the money come from. Should it come from the public funding, from the private funding? We've talked about which emissions should be covered by it. We've talked about how to certify it. Candice from Vera has been telling us about what kind of certification schemes are currently available. We've talked about where we stand in a policy sense. That with the Commission working on a text at the moment, with the Council that Fernando is involved in, pretty much about to sign off on a document tomorrow. And we've heard about some of the criticisms and some of the maybe drawbacks of this green business model, and the fact that it may leave certain farmers behind or not reward certain farmers as they deserve. So that's my very rapid summary of our discussion. We've run over a little bit of time, but to Eric, to Candice, to Fernando, and to Lucas, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I'll see you and speak to you all soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yes.